More reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6 a bigger jackpot game.
The Super 6 jackpot for Friday, May 28th is $230,000. Super 6, more jackpot money.
More jackpot money. More reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6 a bigger jackpot game.
This evening on the VC3 News Update, Braxa commences a 7-day $3 million road cleaning program. Commissioner of Police Mr. Colin John re-elected for a second term as ACCP President. And the coordination of supplies to St. Vincent and the Grenadines from Trinidad and Tobago hailed a success. And in sports, Team Athletics SVG completed another of its local competitions last weekend at the Diamond Track facility. Darkview Explorers and Lasso Frey Hikers won in contrasting fashions yesterday at the Annisville Playing Field in the VPL 3.0. And Vincentian fast bowler Darius Martin was yesterday drafted by the Windward Islands Volcanoes for the 2021-22 Professional Cricket League. Join us at 7 p.m. for these stories and more on the VC3 News Updates.
On Friday, May 28th, there'll be thousands of dollars to be won. A lotto jackpot of $275,000. A new home, car, or that college education.
Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
Next lotto jackpot, $275,000.
Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Roundtable Talk. This evening we are talking recovery, resettlement and the upcoming hurricane season. And joining me at the roundtable this evening are Director of NEMO, Michelle Forbes, Town Planner, DORNET Hull, and Manager of the Met Services at AIA, Mr. Billy Jeffers. Welcome, gentlemen and ladies, to the program. Seems as though we are, leave it what hazard, probably going into another. It's the start of the hurricane season, another 6 days or so. Let's talk about what's happening right now in terms of people who are resettling back home. What is the current status from the NEMO perspective?
Okay, good evening, listeners, and good evening to my fellow panelists this afternoon or this evening. Over the last few days, and last week in particular, we would have had persons returning to the communities between Mount Young, that's the Mount Young River on the windward side, near to the gas station, and the Pitibodal area on the leeward side of the island. We had about, so far, just over 100 persons leaving the public shelters, and we have a few other persons, families, who have requested support who have been staying in private homes. We have quite a number of persons booked for over the next few days, with the majority of persons leaving over the weekend to return to areas as Georgetown, as far north as Georgetown, closer to the Rabaca River, but not over the Rabaca River. We have not allowing persons yet to resettle over north of the Rabaca. So as far as Langley Park area, Rabaca, and as far as Pitibodal on the western side. So persons are moving back slowly. The cleanup is ongoing with the agencies like Braxa. Persons are doing their different cleaning. The Red Cross is distributing cleaning kits to those persons in the communities who have been returning, and the work continue, and slowly the cleaning and the recovery effort has begun.
I know you said over 100 people from the public shelters. Have you any record of people in private shelters returning at all?
Most persons in the private shelters are doing it on their own, are returning on their own. So we have a more accurate figure of those persons who are really in the emergency shelters, the public emergency shelters.
Okay, and as all this is happening, the people are going back, the hurricane season is upon us. let's talk a little bit about the previous season and what we can anticipate for the upcoming hurricane season.
Okay, good evening, Teresa, and good evening to the viewers of VC3 TV. Okay, from the onset, I want to say that we are somewhat in a hazardous environment, a hazardous period. And if we recall from the beginning of 2020, drought was ongoing, right? In fact, drought subsided sometime in early July, and it was an extremely eventful drought. As we recall, we had water disruptions throughout St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as some impacts to the agriculture sector. I think the agriculture sector reported losses to crops and livestock amounted to some 16 million Eastern Caribbean dollars, just about $6 million US. And from then, from that, we went to the start of the Atlantic hurricane season. Again, that was very impactful across the Atlantic basin. The Atlantic basin covers North America, Central America, and the Caribbean. It was a record-breaking season with 13 named storms, 14 hurricanes, including 7 major hurricanes. Luckily for St. Vincent, we were not directly impacted by these systems, as most of these systems impacted North America and Central America. However, I think it was late July, we were placed under tropical storm warning for the passage of tropical storm Gonzalo. It went west out of mainland St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and we had some impact in the southern Grenadines. The highlight of the season, though, was from a less developed system. It was from a tropical wave interacting with a trough system, and the constituency of South Central Windward was severely impacted. I recall Hadley's Village, Diamonds Village, New Delphi, being impacted. And this event was primarily a rain event with strong gusty winds. And I think, and Forbes could correct me if I'm wrong, I think close to 200 houses were either damaged or completely destroyed from this event. Right? And I just want to say one more thing. On the onset of the rainy season, we had an outbreak, dengue fever. As you know, with rain and you have stagnant water, it's kind of promote the breeding of mosquitoes. And unfortunately, we had some fatalities from dengue fever. And all of this took place in COVID period. And there was no letting up after the Atlantic hurricane season, which ended November the 30th. Because a month later, Lassafre began erupting effusively. And as we know, last month, it moved to an explosive state. So I think it's important that, you know, we kind of establish the environment in which we are going into the hurricane season in. And I would go as far as saying that we are going into the season somewhat vulnerable.
Okay. In terms of named storms, what does the outlook look like for 2021? Okay.
The Met Services, we endorse seasonal forecasts from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. They're located in the United States. That's our primary source, right? And we also look at forecasts from the Colorado State University as well. Now, the general consensus from both entities is for tropical storm and hurricane activity for 2021 to be active. And when we say active, we mean that the historical average of 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes will be surpassed. So, specifically, NOAA, they are forecasting 3 to 20 named storms for the Atlantic season, 6 to 10 hurricanes, including up to 5 major hurricanes. CSC, on the other hand, they give you like a fixed number. They are looking at 17 named storms, 8 hurricanes, and 4 major hurricanes. So basically, we could expect a lot of activity during the 2021 Atlantic hurricane season.
Okay, DORNET, where does physical planning come into all of this?
Good afternoon to viewers of VC3 and to the panelists and moderator. Well, physical planning, basically, we are here to guide development in the country. And as you know, we live in a multi-hazardous island. So if we are not affected by one hazard, we will be affected by another, whether it be a landslide, volcanic eruption, and storm surges. So what we would like persons to be reminded of, especially in the hurricane season, when they are building their homes, the builders must remember that connection between the ring beam and the rafters, to have them use hurricane straps, because what we have noticed over the years that roofs are always affected by hurricane force winds. You know, we have the building code. We encourage persons to build using the building code as their guideline. The building code was established to mitigate against damage, severe damage to household and the housing stock. So once you follow the building codes and the guidelines, you should be able to have a house that will withstand at least a Category 3 hurricane. What we've noticed in the past years that we have Category 5. It's expensive to build for Category 5 to withstand Category 5 conditions. However, one school of thought suggests that at least if you build one room, or, you know, to at least be able to evacuate to that room if all else fails. That is something that we can also explore. But using the building code and the building guidelines is your best defense against a hurricane. The building code, however, unfortunately, never took into consideration a volcanic eruption and the effects of a volcanic eruption. What we have seen in this eruption is that ashfall was on basically every household, every building. But there were some buildings that collapsed, mainly because of the way they were constructed and the materials they use. So that is something that we have to look into. In the areas where there were lahars, where persons build in the riverbed, naturally, the river would always take its course. So if even you see an area and it seems flat to you, but historically it was a river would always go back to its natural course. So we should stay away from building in riverbeds.
Okay, so can we expect some adjustments to the building code and guidelines in view of the fact that we now have had the experience of a volcanic eruption where there were no provisions in those guidelines? So is there likely to be any review sometime soon?
I would imagine that there will be a review. I have heard, this is not confirmed, that engineers are already gathering information so that they can now include it, because a lot of the islands in the Caribbean actually have volcanoes. So that is something that I think it was a major oversight, because I know, you know, we know that the volcano was there, but we haven't heard anything from her since 1979. So we got relaxed, we got comfortable, and we forgot that, yes, she is still very much present and she owns the land, because we are volcanic islands.
Okay. When we come back, there's a question. Given a vulnerable landscape compounded by the volcano and COVID, what are the strategies have we put in place or intend to put in place given the active season ahead? So you guys can think about that and respond when we come back from our first break.
This evening on the VC3 News Update, Braxa commences a 7-day $3 million road cleaning program. Commissioner of Police Mr. Colin John re-elected for a second term as ACCP President, and the coordination of supplies to St. Vincent and the Grenadines from Trinidad and Tobago hailed a success. And in sports, Team Athletics SVG completed another of its local competitions last weekend at the Diamond Track facility. Dark View Explorers and La Soufrière hikers won in contrasting fashions yesterday at the Annisville Playing Field in the VPL 3.0. And Vincentian fast bowler Darius Martin was yesterday drafted by the Windward Islands Volcanoes for the 2021-22 Professional Cricket League. Join us at 7 p.m. for these stories and more on the VC3 News Updates.
Back when we took our first break, we were supposed to respond to the first question we see on our screen. Should I repeat, or you remember what it was? So, well, just for the viewers, given a vulnerable landscape compounded by the volcano and COVID, what other strategies have we put in place or intend to put in place given the active season ahead? Michelle, I don't know if you want to take the first bite at that.
Certainly. One of the things we have seen coming out of, I'll start with the volcano and its effects and impacts so far. One of the hazards we saw from the La Soufrière explosive eruption is the lahars coming through the valleys, and especially in communities Sandy Bay and Rabaka. And definitely in its current state, housing cannot go back in some of these dry guts or rivers. As DORNET said earlier, the rivers have come back for its natural course, and a lot of these rivers, a lot of these houses were built in these guts, so we cannot in this particular hurricane season allow those persons to go back into those vulnerable locations, because we are going to continue to have lahars, because we have tons of ash in the mountain waiting to come down, and we can have these lahars with us for quite some time. It can be years. And once we have the rainfall, we can have the ash coming into the system, and we have the lahars flowing down the mountain. So that is one strategy in terms of not allowing persons to really resettle in those areas. One of the important things for us going forward, though, is for us to do the digital mapping or modeling of those communities that have been impacted. And I think that is really, really critical for us to really guide the whole development planning. How are we going to rebuild in the future, if we are going to rebuild in some of these communities, to really guide that planning process. And we need to do that quickly to ensure that we are guided. Persons like DORNET can really see how do we guide that whole physical planning within those communities. One of the things we are looking at now, we expect that we might have persons, or we may have persons in emergency shelters for some time. Certainly persons in Sandy Bay may not be able to return soon. I can't give a time frame. So we definitely now have to look for additional emergency shelters. And we actually have started that process. We have to look for additional emergency shelters that are up to hurricane standard. Because some of the shelters that we use for volcanic emergency are not hurricane standard. So we have to move those persons now out of those particular shelters into shelters that have been designated as hurricane shelters. With reference to the COVID-19 protocols, we would have actually worked with the Ministry of Health since last year to implement a lot of the COVID-19 protocols in the emergency shelters. The Ministry of Health has added additional measures to support the whole shelter management and movement of persons, especially in communal environment. So if you're moving from a shelter to shelter, for example, you must be tested. You cannot just move from one shelter to the next, so that you know your status. And of course, what if you have anything, whether you're taking something into another shelter, so you can be guarded, you can be quarantined, and of course the rest of the population can be protected to some extent. So those are some of the strategies and measures that we are using going into the hurricane season.
Any additional from the weather standpoint?
Oh yes, Teresa, and this is ongoing from the Met Services perspective. When we are forecasting heavy rainfall, we tend to contact SRC, well, specifically the Belmont Observatory, to give them a heads up as to what can be expected. Because as Michelle rightly said, lahars is something that will continue when there's heavy rainfall. And as you know, people will be in the valleys around the volcano doing cleanup work and so forth. So you want to ensure that they have the information for safety reasons.
Okay. Can these lahars be like you could be in the area cleaning and it just happens suddenly?
Yeah, what's happening is we realize when there could be localized rainfall over the volcano, right? And basically, lahars, you have materials being that were deposited in the explosive phase, including ash. There's rock of various sizes, fallen trees, and once they mobilize on the rainfall, they would come down the rivers and streams at very rapid pace, and basically they would move everything in their path. So it's very important that people be aware of the surroundings when they are in the valleys around the volcano.
Okay, somebody's asking, I think you may have answered it, somewhere in between, with the hurricane season approaching and the ongoing threat of lahars, is it wise to have persons return to the orange and red zones at this time?
Well, the areas that persons are returning, we are comfortable. We have communities that will always be at risk for flooding. Communities like South Rivers, Spring Village, those are traditional communities that flood easily. So that threat of flooding always remain within those communities. But certainly the lahars will predominantly be Arabica northwards, north of the dry river. So the areas that we're asking persons to reoccupy, even, yes, you'll have flooding, but in terms of the lahars, not so much in those communities.
Okay. Somebody is suggesting, why don't you guys use the ash to make water barriers like sandbags for the hurricane season?
I'm not sure about that. I think they tend to wash away easily. Probably have to cement it.
So you're the physical expert, so you can...
Donna can explore that.
That is something we can explore.
Okay.
We can explore. We need to explore the different uses of the ash actually, to see how feasible it is to use it in the construction industry. See if it's okay to be able to, do renderings and things like that. So it's something that we could explore.
And there's a suggestion for stronger emphasis on community-based DRM moving forward and building their capacity.
Certainly. So yeah, definitely. I think what these particular emergencies over the years, we have been impacted. We have a complexity of hazards. We're extremely vulnerable to a number of hazards, and we are becoming more and more vulnerable. I'm not sure if you're recognizing that, because of the way we live, where we build, and where we choose to build, and the type of homes too. Because even though the housing stock has become a little better, we are still building in vulnerable areas. The community-based structure. Once you have a community-based structure, the national structure tends to be even stronger. And especially now in the communities north of Arabica, what we have to be cognizant of is that these communities are going to become more and more isolated once resettlement happens. So they have to build a whole self-sufficiency within these communities. We have to prepare for these communities to be cut off for at least a week sometimes, getting access, especially via land. So we have to build that whole community-based structure and support system within these communities to really boost the entire national system also.
And just to add to what Michelle is saying, and to be fair, I think work has commenced in this regard. I recall, I think it was last year, there was a community early warning project. I think Cubans were doing some work in it, where they were placing automatic water stations upstream in the river. And the plan basically was for the community to take ownership of these automatic water stations and gather the necessary information for early warnings.
So what has become of that particular initiative?
Well, I think it's ongoing still, and we were in the phase of procuring the equipment. I think that was the last phase that I recall.
Okay, so the equipment is not really fully operational.
No, not fully operational yet.
I want to come back a little bit more to building codes and guidelines. How important it is for people to adhere to these guidelines and codes, and how much of a challenge do you have getting people to actually adhere to them?
To comply. Well, I must say that compliance has increased over the years as we continue to do, sensitization and promotion of the building code. However, persons are reluctant sometimes to use the building code as a guideline for whatever reason, one or the other, whether it's expenses or whatever. I would strongly suggest that we stick to the building codes. The building codes were developed after the Ivan hurricane ravaged Grenada, and they were developed by a broad base of engineers and architects who studied the housing stock in the region and developed this building code to suit our weather patterns. Yes, it may be a little bit more costly because historically we have some habits that, that we tend to want to hold on to culturally. So in the past, we would have used pad footings, and now we are asking persons to, use strip footings,
What's the difference between?
The strip footings is actually a stronger whole because it ties the columns and the beams together in your foundation, as opposed to the pad footing, which is an isolated column. So it actually helps to stabilize, because remember, you don't know the soil, the soil content of your home. You could find that information out, but because depending on the soil content, it is strongly suggested that you use the tie footing.
Okay. Somebody's saying that, I guess they're referring to the whole question of adherence to building codes and guidelines, that we should consider this also in the context of poverty.
Yes, I think that's what I one of the struggles that one of the constraints that we have. Vincentians tend to love their homes. We are big on home ownership, and oftentimes persons who are less fortunate can't comply because of economic constraints. However, because they can't comply, we see year after year, these are the homes that are damaged. So that is something that we have to look into. What we neglected also to mention, we should cut our overhanging trees, any trees that are, near to you, to your home. Also, think about your windows. If your windows can withstand certain strengths, hurricane strength, whether it's category 3, category 5, 150 miles per hour strength. And the connection is very important to your ring beam and your rafters and those hurricane straps. I know that they can be costly, but what are the
that was the next question effects? I was going to ask. Is cost a deterrent?
I think it is. Okay. But it's unfortunate because you're trying to save money, you end up spending more. So
we'll talk some about that when we come back from our next break. Back in just a moment.
The Super 6 jackpot for Friday, May 28th is $230,000. Super 6, more jackpot money.
More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6, a bigger jackpot game.
On Friday, May 28th, there'll be thousands of dollars to be won. A lotto jackpot of $275,000. A new home, car, or that college education.
Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
Next Lotto jackpot, $275,000.
Just before we took the last break, we were talking about the idea of cost being a constraint for the poor communities in their ability to adhere to the building codes and guidelines. How can they be supported? How can the poor communities be supported in order for them to follow the codes and guidelines? Are there any special considerations?
Well, we do offer advice freely. We offer advice freely to persons once they come in to our office. Our office is always open to guide persons. However, we do not have a policy where we actually help in providing the materials that they may need to build. Yes, there are projects in the Ministry of Housing, the Housing Department, the Life to Live program, but that is also with its limitations. So it is a question that we must address, and it would take a collective agreement and probably be directed by the policymakers as into how we can go forward to assist persons who are less fortunate to build according to the standard.
Okay, so I think there's a conversation that needs to be had, especially as we go forward into the whole resettlement,
Yes.
beyond the river and so forth. There's a video I think that we want to show with the lahars. I don't know if the guys are looking. Can we have some of the effects of the lahars? So would this be considered effect of lahars as well? Yeah.
What I think,
Ashfall, what's happening
No, it's
here?
both. I think look at the levels of the ash.
yeah.
Look at how high it is, which mean material came through it also. Look at this, almost at the roof window level. So the roof has collapsed, but also you have lahars would have gone through. This one is clear.
What I think is happening as well is that the ash mixed with rainfall.
Once it get moist, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like concrete. So the weight of that is somewhat exacerbating the problems.
Yeah, you've got a liquor there, boy.
How much of that can we expect when the rainy season sets in?
Well,
And is it going to be the same kind of effect?
well, the concerns we have, and we mentioned it before, the lahars, that is a major concern. And the second one would be what we are looking at now, the roofs, collapse of roofs and so on. And I know cleaning up is ongoing, particularly in the orange zone. But I mean, if in the red zone there are still ash on the roofs, then we can expect more of that.
Feelings, yeah.
I think this is Sandy Bay. We have this video is from Sandy Bay of lahars moving through, and you can see how fast that is moving.
Fast moving,
Yeah. You don't want to be caught in that.
I think one of the worrying things too for the infrastructure is that all of those trees that have been damaged and burnt, they're still waiting to come down in some heavy rainfall, and those can come now and even block whatever bridges and roads that are remaining, and destroy them. So that's another threat for the hurricane season.
So it is safe to say that it's really not a good time for residents of the red zone to be
Resident over
considered
north of the Rabica.
north of the Rabica.
North of the Rabica. Because you must remember to Georgetown was included in the red zone because of the potential for pyroclastic flows along the coastline. Hence, that's why it's termed a red zone also, but not in the same context, of course, of the lahars as we're seeing on the screen.
In terms of resettlement, DORNET, would you recommend that any kind of resettlement is done in these particular areas where we have seen this kind of devastation and destruction?
Unfortunately, I won't be able to answer that question because that would be a question that would be directed by the policymakers. So I won't be able to answer that question, and I don't think we have an all clear as yet from the volcano. So certainly we don't know. We hope for the best, but we still have to prepare for the worst. But resettlement policies are not.
What would be your advice?
Oh, you want to put me on the spot there. I would first have to do a deep analysis because we haven't been able to go into the red zone deeply to see exactly what happened. We first have to do an inventory, and then we'll be able to get a more informed position on the matter, because we first need to map out the areas where we had the pyroclastic flows, where the rivers are, where the lahars, the rivers that would have had the lahars, we need to know where they are. We need to know the housing stock that was damaged, in what areas. There are a lot of things that we need to consider before we can get to a position where we recommend relocation.
Or resettlement.
Resettlement.
Somebody's asking, I think this one is for you, is there anything in the building code or building guidelines that provides guidance on safe methods of construction for wooden structures?
Yes, certainly. We have wooden structures and we have concrete structures covered in the building code.
Okay, so there you have it. Okay, so weather-wise, what can we look forward to?
In the short term?
Short term.
Okay. Well, for the next couple of days, we haven't. We normally do a 3-day forecast, nothing of significance. But we also produce a 3-month forecast. And based on the outlook, what we are expecting for the next 3 months, that is June, July, and August, is for rainfall activity to somewhat be below normal. But as we move to the wetter part of the peak of the hurricane season, we expect rainfall activity to increase. So that's the outlook. And we update this outlook every month for 3 months.
Okay. Can you predict when and if a lahar will take place?
What we have been seeing, and this is based on some data that we have been gathering, when there's maybe less than 10 millimeters of rainfall, we realize that seismic is reporting lahar. So the preliminary analysis is that under minimal rainfall, materials get mobilized and lahars are being reported.
Okay. Michelle, you're managing multiple hazards at the moment. There's the eruption of a volcano. There's still the COVID, and we are about 5 or 6 days away from the start of the hurricane season. What is your planning process like at the moment, considering all of these?
It's we continue, thinking about the hurricane season in this context. You had to really cast your mind a bit forward, looking at the complex situations that we can face, especially going into the hurricane season, and the already vulnerable state of some of the communities. We certainly we have not yet seen the mapping in terms of the digital mapping, but we know some of the water courses have changed because of the pyroclastic flows, the buildup of materials in some of these communities, especially on the leeward side. The only good thing so far on the leeward side is where we have these high buildup is that we do not have settlements in those communities, Richmond, Narakai area, but definitely on the northern part of the island. The uncertainty for us is how much or how many trees that have been burnt or damaged, destroyed, that is waiting to come down. And that's we saw what happened in 2011 with all those trees and coming down and can block the rivers, dam the rivers, and also create destruction to infrastructure, the bridges and the roads, and on the northern part of the island, northeast part of the island, they're already so severely damaged. But all is not lost, because we still have to continue that whole preparation for all hazards and for the hurricane season. It was, I sat and I said, what do I say to people this hurricane season?
I was going to ask you that.
What do I say to people? Stay with friends and families when their friends and families already housing persons from the north, from the persons who have been displaced. What do you say? Hunker down. But the thing is that your house may still not be safe enough. So we have to do, as individuals, we have to really look at our individual preparedness much more carefully than we have been doing over the years, because the complexity of hazards, we have to support our brothers and sisters and our family during different emergencies, and we ourselves now are at risk because of the whole other thing. We have to support some other persons, and then we become a bit more vulnerable, maybe socially also. So this whole complexity, we need to look at that individual preparedness to ensure that we as individuals are really prepared in terms of whether it's our housing. I know housing stock depends on your purse, how you can adhere to the building codes, but I think we need to look better at that whole individual responsibility within the communities, especially how we build, where we build. Two key points: how we build, where we build, and remember that we cannot sit and wait until the hurricane season starts. DORNET made a point of the whole trees. Too many times you have persons waiting until a storm is near Barbados and trying to cut their tree. And then, of course, if that tree falls on your house, that's it for you. The house roof is gone. That's $40,000 there. If depends on your structure, and then you have nowhere to go. So these are the things we have to also look at, upgrading some of our emergency shelters to make them have a bit more amenities. Those are some of the issues we have to look at, because we are not going to. We can't run from the hurricanes. We cannot run from the volcanic eruption, and we can't run from the landslides and the flooding. Because landslide and flooding are the two main hazards we have each year. And our soils are young. Once we have the rainfall, we're going to have the landslides. We are going to have the flooding.
Are we going to be telling people to do things differently this coming hurricane season, bearing in mind the other things that we are facing at the moment? We'll talk about that when we come back.
This evening on the VC3 News Update, BRAXA commences a 7-day $3 million road cleaning program. Commissioner of Police Mr. Colin John re-elected for a second term as ACCP President, and the coordination of supplies to St. Vincent and the Grenadines from Trinidad and Tobago hailed a success. And in sports, Team Athletics SVG completed another of its local competitions last weekend at the Diamond Track facility. Darkview Explorers and Lasso Frey Hikers won in contrasting fashions yesterday at the Annisville Playing Field in the VPL 3.0. And Vincentian fast bowler Darius Martin was yesterday drafted by the Windward Islands Volcanoes for the 2021-22 Professional Cricket League. Join us at 7 p.m. for these stories and more on the VC3 News Updates.
When we took that last break, we were talking about what do we say differently or what do we do differently in preparation for the upcoming hurricane season, bearing in mind we are already facing hazardous conditions. There's COVID, there's still dengue to a certain extent, and of course there's the eruption. What do we do or say differently to prepare people?
First of all, it has to be all hands on deck. Often we see the private sector tend to get a bit more involved after an emergency in the relief operations, but it has to be a bit reverse. All of society have to be involved in preparing for all emergencies. The basic things that we keep pushing every year. We saw a day or two of ashfall crippled our system, our water system, because we had to shut down to preserve the system. The importance of still having water storage cannot be overemphasized. I keep saying every year, when we were growing up, we saw our grandparents with the pot of water under the cupboard, under the sink, and but we have moved away from that because we have had a reliable water system. So we need to go back to some of those days of ensuring that we have enough water for the family to last a week or a couple of days a week, if needed be. We also need to map a bit more of our groundwater resources and our springs. I know CWS is doing that because we still haven't. We need to remember that it's still climate change we're talking about, and the climate has changed. We are getting a bit drier each year, and we have to remind that we need to look at alternative sources of water, and we need to go back to the basics of preparing for all hazards. And as we enter into hurricane season, the trimming of your trees, having enough food supply, those basic things, and of course knowing where you are in relation to the various hazards and threat, knowing if you are prone to landslide, knowing if you are prone to flooding, and in the communities that you live.
Okay.
And just to add to that, we need to also consider your emergency plan, and emergency plan would include important contact numbers, your storage of your important documents. Other considerations should be your drain, and it shouldn't be a one-off just before the season. It should be frequently clean nearby drains. Another thing you may want to consider is to review your insurance policy to ensure you have adequate coverage. So those are some of the fundamentals of hurricane preparedness.
Okay. Anything to add to that?
Well, I think they both covered it. However, we must always remember to be prepared. We can't say it often enough. We need to be prepared for any eventuality, because you could be in a landslide-prone area, you could be in a flooding area, and you have to know where your emergency shelters are. You have to have an emergency plan so your family knows exactly what to do when disaster strikes, because disaster is not a multiple choice question. You have to know exactly what you're doing in the middle of a disaster. We tend to slight water, but we have to always remember, as Billy mentioned, to clear our drains around our homes, the roads, nearby to the roads and stuff like that, so that we can try to build our resilience to whatever may come our way.
You mentioned the importance of knowing your emergency shelters, but there's going to be somewhat of a difference this hurricane season, because emergency shelters, most of them are in use. I know you did say that you are actually in the process of identifying some
additional shelters. Of course, we wouldn't be naming the shelters north of the Rabaca. Eventually, at Fitzhughes and Chateaubillet will get back into their communities. Hopefully, depends on what's happening at the volcano and the levels of cleaning. So it means that we have actually less shelters. Emergency shelters for this hurricane season. We do have shelters, but less shelters, because we may not be able to name those that already are occupied, because we do not want to have overcrowding, which is a recipe for the spread of the COVID-19 virus. So that's one thing we need to look at. And one of the things one of the questions, a comment that a listener or viewer made earlier, the whole community structure. that community disaster management is so important. And we need to get our communities. Yes, you have it ongoing. We have been working with the Red Cross for years. We have been working with physical planning, doing mapping in the communities for a long period of time. But the community structures need to be strengthened. People need to come together and look at how they can sustain their communities, what they can do as individuals, and at the community level to really boost their readiness. We, for example, over the last few years, we were working on the Volcano Ready Communities project. And it was not just about the volcano. It was looking at the hazards in a multi-hazard context, a multi-hazard environment, and 2021 it has been manifested in a whole multi-hazard environment where we need to now look at how all the hazards come together and make us more vulnerable and how we have to prepare
and they do
for
come together.
And they do come together. They're all coming together. God forbid we don't know what is happening in this hurricane, see what is going to happen, but it it can be on a collision course. We don't know for all 3-4 hazards coming together, both the health emergency part of it and the other, because every emergency has a health emergency component. We have seen with the last volcanic eruption, we have seen the health risk in terms of the COVID. You may have if you have overcrowding, you can have other health diseases and so coming out. You can have public health emergencies with the sewer. Overcrowding means that there's waste. Persons in the shelter have 3 meals a day. There's waste. You can have other emergencies. So there's a linkage of all the hazards that we have to put that whole that bigger context and that bigger outlook, not just a hurricane by itself or volcanic eruption by itself. All are colliding. And it's how we as entities manage, how we as individuals. And we cannot do it alone. It's just not NEMO. It's not just a physical plan. It's just not the Met Service. It's a national system. And we all have to really come together to really push the national system and also incorporate the other private and the civil society into that whole structure to really build our resilience.
Somebody's saying hurricane preparation is different than volcano. The people must be aware of that and given early guidelines else. Yep, somebody else wants to know, not to beat a dead horse, but have areas in the green zone or other safe zones been identified for relocating the displaced when it becomes safe to be relocated should folks not want to return home?
I will answer that to say that there have been different, we are now looking into the whole rehabilitation recovery component now, and those meetings are ongoing, those plannings are going. DORNET will be part of those committees, myself and different entities. So while we have been looking, yes, but we cannot say just yet in terms of the policy as we go forward. But those are some of the situations, those are some of the scenarios, relocation, temporary housing that have been thrown around, but we cannot say yet as to what will happen.
Okay, and somebody, I probably think you may have spoken about this. When are the hurricane readiness guidelines and preparedness, including a list of available shelters, going to be available as a public service to Vincentians?
Hurricane guidelines are there all year round. They haven't changed, so the guidelines are there all year round. We have a preliminary list of the hurricane shelters that we hope to share by weekend, and then the final list will be shared as we go, by the first week of June thereabouts. So hurricane preparedness is all year round.
Okay, as we wind down, weather.
Okay, what I will say to end is, and I started off by saying we are in this hazardous environment, this hazardous period. And to be fair, I think the government ministries, authority have been doing their part in terms of preparedness and response. So the onus should be on individuals to do their part, right? Hurricane season, as I mentioned earlier, is forecast to be active. And we just went through the list of hurricane preparedness. So, I just want to say that, we should don't wait until a storm is approaching to put plans in place. And we just have to hope for the best. Hopefully we're not severely or not directly impacted by a hurricane or storm.
Okay, DORNET.
Well, from my end, I would like to encourage persons to follow the building codes and the guidelines, and let's work together. The physical planning, we are here to guide. We are here to guide you. We are here to discuss with you, dialogue with you, so that we can get the best result and build your resilience. We are here as a government agency to provide that advice for you. Depending on where you're building, you may have one hazard or the other. So once you seek our advice, we would give our advice freely and accurately. At the moment, we have placed on hold applications in the red zone, like be above the dry river especially, because we are uncertain of the pending hazard. So until we get the all clear, we have placed those applications on hold at the moment.
Which makes sense,
for our own safety. And the building code and guidelines are really there for your safety. So it's strongly suggested that you adhere.
You have the final say, Ms. Forbes.
We are entering the hurricane season. We have the volcano still looming, threat still looming over our heads. But as we enter the season, let's remember, it doesn't take a storm or a hurricane to bring us to really cause damage. We can just have heavy rainfall. Last year we had gusty winds that we had 200 homes damaged. So it doesn't take a storm. It doesn't take a hurricane. And we must remember that once we are vulnerable and we open ourselves to the various threats and hazards that we can be impacted, let us work together as a country, as individuals, as communities to really build and share that knowledge of preparing for the hurricane season. And let us put that whole individual responsibility and individual effort to being a bit more ready for the hurricane season. Now, it cannot be business as usual. We are in unprecedented times. The different hazards that we have faced, the different threats that we are facing now going into the hurricane season, and we have to be ready.
Well, that's our program for today. Thank you very much, Billy Jeffers, DORNET Hull, and Michelle Forbes. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again next week, Wednesday, at the same time. Good evening.
Good evening.